So guys, okay, so before I get started, let me just make this point real quick. This first act, especially if you go back and rewatch it today in 2021, especially having the knowledge of where this character goes after this, the first act of this film is extremely jarring to go back and rewatch, because that is some really convincing CGI on that gangly Steve Rogers, isn't it? I mean, it just looks like a completely different dude. What's going on, ladies and gentlemen? Welcome back to yet another brand new movie review here on the channel, and as always, I thank you all so much for stopping by, and I hope you enjoy your stay. And yeah, here we are. Welcome back to the Marvel Studios playlist. I'm super excited to be doing another one of these. It's been a minute. And in case you missed it, at the start of this year, I promised all of you that I was going to try and review every single Marvel Cinematic Universe film in the build-up to Black Widow. And I am making some considerable progress so far. I'm already 4 movies deep into Phase 1. I most recently reviewed the first Thor movie here on the channel. That review was really fun to make as well. In case you missed that one, I'll leave a link to it at the end card. But this time around, we are looking at another character that was an extremely huge gamble for Marvel Studios back in the day. Captain America. That's right, ladies and germs. Today's subject is Captain America the First Avenger, which actually came out only a couple months after Thor. And this is actually the second installment we've gotten of Captain America on film, but we don't talk about that first installment from the 90s, do we? No, we do not. Excellent job. Now, Captain America the First Avenger is actually set during World War II. It's the earliest in the MCU's timeline historically. And it follows a rather frail young man named Steve Rogers, played here by Chris Evans. And he really wants to serve his country, but nobody will let him because of his unfortunate amount of physical limitations. But soon enough, he's taken in for an experiment run by this mad scientist, played by Stanley Tucci, and he's transformed into a beefcake. Better yet, the super soldier we know as Captain America. And his main objective is that he must stop the demented Red Skull, played by Hugo from using the Tesseract as an energy source for world domination. And as is the case with all of these Marvel reviews here on the channel, this video is going to be filled with some mild to moderate spoilers. So just in case you guys haven't seen Captain America the First Avenger and don't want to be spoiled, just to give you fair warning before I trudge ahead. But this movie, guys, I honestly forgot how big of a cast this was and how many talented names were featured in this. And not only just in this cast, but also in the director's chair. This is a job that was volleyed around from Marvel veterans like Jon Favreau and Louis Leterrier, but then it finally fell into the hands of Joe Johnston, who, if that name sounds familiar to you guys, this is the one that brought you The Rocketeer back in the 90s, which is another extremely underrated film. And I think one thing that Joe Johnston does really well, just in general as a director, he really knows how to capture the time period his movies are set in. And that's a trait that certainly carries over to Captain America the First Avenger. He really understands where this is set, and specifically what this world looked like back then, just with the costume design, the gritty feel of these action sequences, as well as an incredibly vintage feeling score from the one and only Alan Silvestri. Those pieces of this puzzle all are really well executed. And those are just some of the things that I really dig about Captain America the First Avenger, among many other things. I think this is one of Phase 1's better films, guys, because I had loads of fun rewatching this film. I mean, part of the fun comes in seeing these beautiful technicals and these really brutal action sequences. And it's interesting because this is not as much of an action-heavy film. It's very dialogue-driven and very character-driven especially, which I love. This script feels especially coherent. It's all about establishing the relationships. Who are these characters? How do they know each other? And I think this film likewise does an excellent job establishing these characters, who they are, and then when you go back and rewatch this film, especially with all of the knowledge that you would have about this universe as more movies came out, it's amazing how many pieces of this dialogue and what these characters do that it just feels like foreshadowing for the future of the MCU. And it all feels super poetic and super beautiful. Now I gotta talk about Chris Evans for a second because he was a freaking revelation as Steve Rogers. Now of course this is not his first foray into the superhero or even the Marvel realm. Just to refresh your memory, this was the original Human Torch back in the mid-2000s when they failed with the Fantastic Four for about the second time, I think. And I think Captain America was the right role at the right time for Chris Evans because it's done him so many favors for his career and he is freaking awesome. I really love especially how he moves the character in relation to where Steve Rogers is in terms of size. Like, he knows how to move when he's super skinny and he also knows how to move once he bulks up. He really understands this character's arc and his struggles, along with being super badass in these action sequences. Speaking of, these stunts and these action sequences when they arrive, really cool. Again, I'm really surprised at how brutal some of this action was, even with a PG-13 rating. It really does feel like you're in a war zone a lot of the time. And Evans is also especially great whenever the emotional parts of this film kick in. Like, whenever characters are separated by space, or when certain characters die, or even when characters are separated just by time. Yeah, how depressing is that? Steve Rogers falls asleep after a crash landing in ice, and he wakes up 70 years later. I mean, that's just fucking, like... Guys, I think I'm speechless. I don't know how I can relate to that. I mean, I obviously think this is a great performance, but every single one of these actors is on their A game here. Sebastian Stan, of course, is introduced here as Roger's best friend, Bucky. Great for the time he's given. And Stanley Tucci, even though he's only in it for like the first act, is great. Even though his character may seem a little too textbook as a mad scientist, I enjoyed him a lot. And Tommy Lee Jones, who I actually forgot was in this movie, had a lot of really great one-liners. Even though this character technically isn't a drill sergeant, he's not going Full Metal Jacket on our asses. But his comedy? Extremely funny and subtle. Yeah, go ahead, jump on. I'm not kissing you. Speaking of, guys, I gotta talk about Hayley Atwell as Peggy Carter because I often think that she is extremely overlooked in this film. Some of you might call me crazy, but I personally think that this is the strongest romantic lead in a comic book film that we've seen over the last 20 years. Agent Carter is fucking awesome. She reminds me a lot actually of Emma Stone as Gwen Stacy in a lot of ways. Except, you know, this came out before The Amazing Spider-Man, and Agent Carter, unlike Gwen, is actually qualified to take bad guys down, and it's not just her decision. Sounds like someone should have been taking notes. I joke, but Atwell is absolutely stellar as Peggy Carter. Her chemistry with Chris Evans, I'm just gonna come out and say it, it's freaking adorable. And I sadly don't think she gets enough credit for her work in this film. She is absolutely great. I mean, I really enjoyed this film. I love the style. I love the feeling of being in this war zone. Joe Johnston, well, okay, I don't actually enjoy being in a war zone. Don't get that twisted. But I do appreciate the fact that Joe Johnston directed this film to really make us feel like we were in this hellhole with these guys. Now, one criticism I often hear about the First Avenger is that it's extremely hokey, and it 100% is. I'm just not gonna beat around the bush. This stuff is super fucking cheesy. And do I think that this was the best way they could have introduced Captain America as a character in this universe? Not a chance in hell. But I do want to give Marvel credit where it's due for trying something out of the box here with this, while also sticking with the old school homages to the Captain America of yesteryear. And I will admit, it's actually kind of funny to see Chris Evans act like he's so out of his element on stage with all those backup dancers. And I also found it really clever to see that this universe actually acknowledges the character of Captain America in comic book form. But here's where I have my issues with the First Avenger. Even though people criticize it for being hokey as hell, some people think it's too simple. And I'll agree on one front with the simplicity. The villain in this film, Red Skull, is an extremely simple villain. Now, Hugo Weaving is doing marvelous things with this role, and the introduction to this character is really haunting. I love the fact that Joe Johnston doesn't really show us what Red Skull even looks like in his final form until halfway through. But that's another thing. I think the design, while cool in concepts, could have been a lot scarier than it was. And I honestly think his motivations could have had a little bit more intrigue and layers to it. I don't know. To me, if you kind of strip the design elements of Red Skull away, he's just kind of a bland bad guy that wants to take over the world. Now, in terms of the simplicity, here's where I disagree with most critics. Some have actually argued that Chris Evans himself is too simple as Steve Rogers. Some have said he's too formulaic. He's naive when he needs to be. He shows courage when he has to, while also being incredibly charming. But I think the way Chris Evans plays this character really, I can't really explain it with words. You just have to watch it to know what I'm talking about. He just brings a certain freshness to this charm in the formula, if that makes sense. And I honestly think the nitpick of simplicity is why people don't look back on this one as fondly as some of the MCU's other finest works, like the original Iron Man or even the original Avengers film. Especially not on the level of the other two Cap films, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And yeah, there are points where it feels like the First Avenger is just your little segue film to get to the big crossover. But that's just the thing, guys. I really enjoyed this film because it is simple. It's easy to follow. The script is coherent. It actually feels like that, unlike Iron Man 2, it has a beginning, middle, and end. And it's a really enjoyable watch. I think this is one of Phase 1's better films. I'm gonna give Captain America: The First Avenger a B+. It's definitely a lot more fun than I remembered it being. I wouldn't go as far as saying this is in my 10 favorite MCU films, but it's still a really fun origin story and a perfectly solid comic book film outing. But have you guys seen Captain America: The First Avenger? Do you enjoy it? Do you not? What is your favorite MCU origin story up to this point? I would love to discuss all of these thoughts and then some all down there in the comments. And if you guys are enjoying this content, and if you guys are looking for a place to continue discussing cinema and all things entertainment, I think this channel may be the one for you. So if you guys are new here, or if you guys haven't already, please definitely consider hitting that subscribe button down below as hard as you possibly can, because it is free, number one. It really would help out my channel. And you subscribers will also be the first ones to know anytime I upload a new video over here. If you guys liked this video also, please feel free to share it with your friends and hit that thumbs up button on your way out. I'd really appreciate that. And as per, look out for more exciting content hitting this channel very, very soon, including my imminent wrap-up of Phase 1 of these Marvel reviews already. Next on this playlist, we're going to be talking about what all these previous 5 films have been building up to: the formation of the Avengers. Or, yes, if you want to use proper terms, the assembly. I can't wait to talk about that one with you guys, as well as much, much more coming very soon. You guys are the best. With all that being said, back talk, commence.